So we'll begin. Okay, so hello again. If you're rejoining us, it's day 4 now of this meditation masterclass exploring aspects of the Metabather practice. Good to have you back if you're rejoining us, and especially warm welcome if it's the first time that you're at one of these sessions. The pattern we've been following is that I give a bit of input first of all, and then we have a period of meditation and then open up to some questions or comments at the end. So we'll keep following that format this morning. I'm Padmasagara here again at Padmaloka in our shrine room. I've just been saying as people have been coming in that we've got a bright sunny morning here with the sun kind of streaming down on Padmaloka. Just outside of the shrine room, actually, we have a stupa. So in the run up to 7 o'clock in the morning, some of the men who are on retreat here with us were just circumambulating. And I noticed this morning there's lovely spring flowers kind of adorning the stupa. It's very nice to have that going on just outside the window. I don't know if many of you here have been to Padmaloka. I know some of you definitely have. I recognize a lot of faces. There are opportunities to come here for everybody, and I just wanted to mention that in June we have an open day here. It's a day of practice, so a day of meditation, ritual, exploring the Dharma together, exploring Buddhism together, and everybody's welcome to that. So do come and join us on the 26th of June for our open day. It'll be lovely weather. The garden will be in full bloom. We can enjoy that together. Nick's just posted a link to the booking page on our website for that. So yeah, do feel free to come and visit Padmaloka in the community here. It'd be lovely to have you. Okay, so that's that. Let's move on and continue exploring aspects of loving kindness meditation, aspects of the Metabather this morning. So a very quick recap on what we've been exploring so far, the ground we've been covering. So we've been exploring in different ways that definition of love that I gave in the first session that Sangharakshita gave, which is that love is the awareness of the being of another person. So love is the awareness of the being of another person. And in the first couple of sessions, we explored that in terms of the essential aspects of Metabather meditation. So what are the essential aspects? Well, drawing on that definition, first of all, we've got awareness. So really coming into an awareness of the totality of our experience, dropping out of those disembodied thought worlds into something more real, into something more balanced. So that's the first essential, is really dropping into that type of awareness. The second essential was then bringing that awareness to the being of ourselves and other people. So really becoming aware as much as possible of the aliveness of ourselves and other people, the kind of fundamentals of our being. And particularly important in that is recognizing that everybody wants to be happy and to be free of suffering and ultimately free of all limitations whatsoever, and kind of boundlessly creative. So we've been looking into those essentials, and what we see is if we can do that, the more we can deepen our awareness of the being of ourselves and other people, metta naturally arises. Metta is the natural response as we deepen that awareness of the being of ourselves and others. Yesterday, we moved on from the essentials to what I've called the intensive aspects of Metabather. So yesterday, we began to do the practice in 5 stages. So this is the classic way that the practice is taught within the Triratna Buddhist community. It goes all the way back, as I said yesterday, at least to Buddhaghosa's Visuddhimagga and his exposition of metta as a 5-stage practice. And I was saying yesterday that those stages are deliberately there to challenge us. So they test our metta. They test it because in bringing to mind our friend, a neutral person, and somebody we regard as an enemy or somebody that we find particularly difficult, what that can stir up is the three root poisons in the mind. So attachment, indifference, and aversion. So probably it's more likely that it's attachment in relation to our friend, indifference in relation to a neutral person, aversion in relation to a person we find difficult. Actually, those three things could arise in relation to anybody. So it might be that we bring to mind our friend and there's aversion that can kick off and emerge in response to our friend. I was saying yesterday that that's all human. That in a way, that's all meant to happen, because that's why the practice is structured as it is. It's trying to stir up the things in our mind that normally or quite often are lower, below our conscious, below the conscious surface. So we were doing the practice yesterday in such a way that we were bringing awareness to the being of another person, but also remaining open and sensitive to our actual emotional responses. So we've got a kind of twofold awareness. There's the awareness of the being of the other person, and then there's the awareness of our actual emotional responses in relation to them. And it might be that the emotional response to other people when we bring them to mind is simply metta. As I say, that would be the kind of natural response to the awareness of the being of another person. But it might also have been that at some point we began to experience the arising of something like attachment, indifference, and aversion. And the way we worked with that is to just constantly expand our awareness, expand our kindly awareness to include that emotional response. And then if we start to judge or get into self-criticism of that response, well, we broaden out again to include that within our kindly awareness. So those reactions of attachment, indifference, and aversion, they're all blockages or restrictions to our metta, or as I said yesterday, kind of knots in our emotional responsiveness. So the more we can broaden our kindly awareness out to include the emotional responses as well as the other person, the more we can broaden that awareness out, the more we can soften, loosen those knots, soften those blockages and resistances. We can't force that. It's kind of an unfolding process. It's got its own life to some extent, but we're always trying to broaden out into more of an expansive, kindly awareness. So that's just a quick recap of what we were exploring yesterday, and we'll continue to do that in the session today. So we'll do the practice in a very similar way, but I just want to add a little bit more input that might be helpful to us. So as I've said, when we bring awareness to other people, we're becoming aware of their being on quite a deep level, as I've said in previous sessions. So we're becoming aware of their kind of fundamental aliveness, the fact that they have a body and senses, feelings and thoughts just like we do. On that level, there's no difference between us. We're all got that fundamental human experience. And we're also coming into awareness of a desire in others to be happy and to be free from suffering, or to be able to grow, to thrive, to flourish. We're trying to tune into that deep desire in others. What might happen, though, is that we become aware of the fact that that person has this desire, but sometimes, even though they want to be free of suffering, well, they do suffer. So we become aware of the fact that, well, people do suffer despite not wanting to. We can also become aware of the fact that people want to be happy, and sometimes they are happy. Sometimes they do feel free of restrictions and limitations. They do develop and display beautiful qualities. So we're tuning into that desire that people have, but not just the desire, but how the extent to which that is able to be realized in their lives. So we can become aware of a person's suffering. We can become aware of a person's joy. And when that happens, if metta is present and flowing, our metta can kind of evolve into slightly different positive emotions. So when metta meets the suffering of another person, it becomes what's known as karuna, or compassion. Karuna is translated as compassion. When our metta meets somebody's joy or somebody's happiness, it becomes mudita, which is sympathetic joy, or kind of gladness and rejoicing in another person's happiness. So metta is very much the root positive emotion, but when it meets different aspects of a person's experience, the tradition describes that as it evolving into another positive emotion. So karuna in response to suffering, compassion in response to suffering, and mudita, sympathetic joy in relation to another person's joy and happiness. So this is acknowledged in the Buddhist tradition in the teaching on the 4 Brahmaviharas. So Brahmaviharas means something like divine abodes, sometimes translated as the 4 immeasurables. So there are 4 of these Brahmaviharas: metta, loving kindness; karuna, compassion; mudita, sympathetic joy; and the last one is upekkha, or equanimity, which I think I mentioned a bit yesterday. So we've got a whole system there of meditation that one can do to really flesh out or elaborate our exploration of metta and positive emotion. It would be great if we had time to go into each of the 4 Brahmaviharas in detail. We don't have the time to do that, but actually we don't really need to. So metta is our focus because it's at the root of all of the other Brahmaviharas. And personally, I'm of the opinion that really there's just one practice, and the 4 Brahmaviharas are ways of kind of opening up that one practice to explore its different facets, which means that we can do a single practice that kind of incorporates elements of those other Brahmaviharas. If we were doing the Brahmaviharas properly, they have slightly different structures to the practice. We move the stages around, we add some extra ones, but we're not going to have time to explore it in that way. So what we will do is we'll just acknowledge that those things can happen. When we become aware of another person, we can acknowledge that we might become aware of the fact that they suffer. We might become aware of the fact that they experience joy and happiness. And so we'll bring that into our metta practice when I lead it through this morning. But I just want to say a few things, particularly in relation to suffering, and if an awareness of the suffering of another person can arise in the meditation, because I think often that can cause some confusion, or people can get tangled up in our responses to suffering. I can get tangled up in my responses to suffering. So just to help to clarify a bit about what's going on, or what can go on in terms of our emotional responses to suffering. So I think I've mentioned this before already, but all these Brahmaviharas have what are known as near enemies and far enemies. So in response to somebody's suffering, yes, we could just experience our metta turning into karuna and resonating with the other person's suffering and experiencing a kind of quite straightforward desire that their suffering is alleviated. That would be karuna, that would be compassion. But often we can slip into these near and far enemies. So the near enemy of karuna, compassion, there are kind of 2. So one of the near enemies is sentimental pity. Sentimental pity. So this is where we're responding to the other person's suffering, but we're kind of maintaining a distance from that suffering, and usually a kind of elevation of ourselves above that person's suffering. So it's not a full engagement with the suffering or a full responsiveness. It's overly sentimental and pitying. The other near enemy is horrified anxiety. So the feeling that in response to somebody's suffering, we have to act and getting into all kinds of anxiety about how it's upon our shoulders that we need to respond to this suffering. We need to sort it out. We need to fix it. So you can see how it's a near enemy, because, in a sense, we do want to respond to other people's suffering. There is a kind of call to action to do that, and that's a good thing. But if we go too far in that direction, we can stray into this near enemy of horrified anxiety, when it's all on us to respond, and we have to completely fix it, when in reality there are some things that we can't fix, and particularly not on our own. Overwhelm, I guess, would be another way of talking about that, wouldn't it? Horrified anxiety. And so then they're the near enemies. The far enemy to karuna or compassion is malice or cruelty. So actually taking delight in the suffering of another person, being kind of glad that we're witnessing the suffering of another person. So some of that, if we experience that in response to other people's suffering, that can be quite alarming. We can feel overwhelmed, but also, particularly if it's malice or cruelty, that can be quite alarming. It just reminds me of the interview that Maitreya Bandhu did with Paul Gilbert, which began this particular cycle of the Nature of Mind project, where he talks about our darker side. And in terms of our emotions, in terms of our psychology, he said people do have a darker side. And there's no kind of problem with that. It's sort of human that we experience negative emotions. But he's very clear that it's only by coming into relationship to it, positive relationship to it, that we can make the active choice to choose more positive emotions and to move away from those kind of responses. So what should we do then if we meet these emotional responses in the course of our Metabather? Say we're becoming aware of the being of another person, we're becoming aware that they suffer, and we start to experience overwhelm, horrified anxiety, sentimental pity, even we might experience kind of malice and cruelty. So what do we do about that? Well, basically, we keep doing what I described yesterday. So keep broadening out that kindly awareness to include and incorporate our own emotional responses. So I think I mentioned yesterday the Salata Sutta, the Sutta of the two arrows, which teaches us that we have an experience. The Buddha describes it as like an arrow coming into us. We have an experience of pain, and what happens is we then have an emotional response, a reaction to that first arrow, which is like a second one coming in. The first arrow is unavoidable. The second arrow, the emotional reaction, the stories that we tell ourselves, actually that is avoidable. We do have some choice around that. Difficult to do. So it might be that we become aware of a person's suffering, and that's painful to us. We kind of feel that, but the near enemies and the far enemies are kind of on top of that, and particularly our judgment of those emotional responses is coming again on top of that. So if we're in the practice, we become aware of somebody's suffering, we start to feel horrified anxiety, or even worse to our mind, we start to experience kind of malice or cruelty. I think the key is broadening our awareness, coming into relationship to those emotional responses, and really not falling into judgment and criticism. If we do fall into judgment and criticism, we just take the next step back and come into relationship to the fact that we're being self-critical and judgmental about our emotions. So always, as I've said, broadening out that kindly awareness to include our complex emotional responses, particularly to the area of human suffering. So yeah, always doing that, kind of stepping back, bringing into kindly awareness. If we're doing that, then what it means is that we are coming in relationship to it. We're not ignoring it. We're not overriding, but also we're not indulging. So we are, as I've said already, loosening knots, softening resistances and blockages, or at least creating the conditions upon which that can take place. So that's really important because it removes the second arrow, brings us into a more direct relationship with either somebody's suffering or somebody's aliveness, somebody's being. And therefore, the metta or the karuna in the case of suffering can flow more freely, or there's space for that to begin to flow more freely. Just a note that there are occasions when suffering is just too overwhelming. So we come into awareness of the fact that people suffer, and it might be that we know somebody whose suffering is so kind of acute and intense that even after everything I've said and trying that kind of approach, we just find it so overwhelming that I think actually in that case what we need to do is just step back. Just step back from that. Come into the body, awareness of the body, even just focus on the other aspects of that person and not just seeing them as solely as a suffering person. That's quite important actually when we're aware of somebody's suffering, not being too narrow about the fact that they suffer, because human experience is quite rich and varied and people can suffer quite intensely, but there's more to them than that. They're not just their suffering. So all of this that I've said also applies to happiness. So again, if we come into relation to somebody's happiness or joy, it might be that again, mudita just begins to flow. So we're seeing them through the eyes of metta, so to speak. We're aware that they're happy at times. We're aware that people have qualities and we can see those qualities. And when our metta comes in relation to that, it might be that we just experience mudita, sympathetic joy, gladness, rejoicing. But it might be that we experience the near and far enemies. Again, so the near enemy of mudita is described as vicarious enjoyment or satisfaction, vicarious enjoyment or satisfaction. So this is kind of over the top admiration. I guess projection, really elevating somebody in a way that's not actually realistic to who that person is. So a kind of vicarious enjoyment. And often I think what that means is that we have so much adoration for this person and their qualities. It's a way of avoiding kind of developing those qualities for ourselves. It's purely a projection outwards that obscures a recognition that we can bring these qualities out ourselves. The far enemy of mudita or sympathetic joy is envy or resentment. So we've probably all experienced that to some extent. I know I experienced that to some extent. We see the qualities in another person, we see them being happy, and there's something in us that doesn't quite like that, doesn't feel quite comfortable with that. There's a block to the extent to which we can rejoice and be glad about the qualities in another person. In a sense, they've got qualities that we want or that we wish we'd had. We have, so we can resent that or envy that. So I want to pull people down a bit. So those things can happen. Like Paul Gilbert says in the interview, we all have a dark side. We all have the capacity to experience negative emotions, even those far enemies of compassion and mudita, malice, cruelty, and envy or resentment. Again, and I can't stress this enough really, we don't have to be self-critical and judgmental about that. That is a human capacity to experience all these different kinds of emotions. All these different kinds of emotions. Buddhism really explores that very thoroughly and very deeply. So we've got the whole Abhidharma tradition that maps out all the different emotional states of mind that a human being can experience. And it's doing that as method. It's not kind of making a judgment that human beings are terrible people because they can experience countless negative emotional states. It's method, it's pragmatic. It's saying we can experience these things, so we need to know what they are, how they manifest, what their kind of characteristics are, so that when we can see it and name it, we can do something about it. We can transform it. And in our case, we're transforming that, as I say, by broadening out our kindly awareness so that we're coming into relationship with these things if and when they do arise in our minds. So don't be too critical. If you are critical, meet that with kindly awareness, kind of ad infinitum. I think we can have a positive, confident attitude towards doing these practices. So we're going to meet everything with kindly awareness, even our self-criticism, and our judgment of ourselves. So we've got an approach. We've always got something we can approach this with, that kind of attitude, and also just bring in, to the extent we can, some sense of humour. Our minds are a bit silly, aren't they? A bit messy. So just having that kind of slightly playful attitude around the edge. So we're taking everything seriously, but we're not taking it too seriously and too kind of tightly. Arloka, who painted this painting behind us, order member who lives in Norwich, he's done our whole amazing shrine room, painted that whole amazing shrine room. He has this phrase that we're all a mess in progress. And I quite like that. We're a mess, but we're in progress. We're doing something about it. We know that we can do something about it. We're not perfect. We've got our imperfections, but we're doing something about it. We know what to do about it. Okay, I think that's all I'll say for this morning. So we'll do the Metabather as we have been doing. I'll drop in a few extra bits of guidance around some of those themes I've just talked about. Maybe one more practical point is, you'll notice yesterday I wasn't dropping in phrases. We explored that a bit on day 2, strengthening our aspiration for the well-being of others, the happiness, freedom from suffering for others. So we weren't deliberately doing that, and that's because I wanted to create a lot of space so that we can experience our emotional responses in relation to our awareness of the being of other people. You can bring those in. So it might be that when we're sitting, you are experiencing just a kind of free-flowing metta or karana mudita, if it takes that kind of flavour. And if that's the case, you could see if you can strengthen that just by dropping in a phrase or a word like we explored on day 2, kind of aspiring or desiring that people grow and flourish, realize their full potential. Or if we're in that kind of awareness of another person, but things feel a bit flat, again, we can drop that in and see if that has some effect. But I would err on the side of not doing that and just really fully exploring both our awareness of other people and our awareness of emotional responses, and seeing if that does enough just to loosen and soften so that we experience more of a kind of natural upwelling of metta and the other Brahmaviharas. Okay, so enough talking from me for this morning. So let's get into our meditation posture, and I'll guide us in the practice. Okay, so settling into your sitting position. Eyes closed or half closed. And first of all, giving ourselves the space to do nothing. Simply sitting with nothing to do, nothing to be. So giving ourselves this space just reveals to us what mind we've got this morning or this evening, depending where you are in the world. And however we are is fine. That's just what we'll be working with, where we'll be starting from. So we'll start to become aware of the totality of our experience, beginning with our physical or energetic experience. So as we have been doing, just dropping awareness down into the energetic sensations of the lower part of the body. So filling the lower half of our body, hips, legs, feet, with awareness. Noticing the energetic sensations in the lower half of the body. Aware of the points of contact between the body and our seat and the floor. We can completely give the weight of the body up to the earth beneath us. Grounding and rooting into the earth. And the upper half of the body rises up from this stable base. So noticing the alertness of the upper half of the body. The spine is aligned. As if the different bones are just resting on top of each other, and the vertebrae, all the way up to the neck and crown of the head. Softening the face, around the eyes, the cheeks, jaw. Noticing how the body moves, the breath. How the chest expands. And resting awareness in the heart center, heart space. So the heart is at the center of our physical, energetic experience. We can also open to our other sensory impressions, sounds, smells and tastes. Anything in the field of vision, even with the eyes closed. It can be as if the heart is listening, sensing. And aware of any thoughts, images arising in the mind, arising in the heart-mind. So all of this rich, alive human experience is arising in a field of awareness, a field of kindly awareness, sensitive to life unfolding in and through us, in all its different ways. And aware of any resistances or knocks, just being able to sit, experiencing ourselves in this way. And enveloping them too in this field of kindly awareness. And expanding awareness now by bringing to mind a friend. So seeing them in the mind's eye or feeling them to be in our presence. Aware of their being, their fundamental aliveness. And aware of our emotional responses. So it might be that metta is arising, is present. We might notice attachment, indifference, aversion. Just coming into relationship with our emotional response. Noticing the effect awareness can have. As we become aware of the being of our friend, aware of their desire to be happy, free from suffering, we might become aware that sometimes they do suffer. Sometimes they're happy. If this awareness arises, just noticing again our emotional responses. Free of judgment and criticism, always broadening our kindly awareness to include any responses, to deepen in relation to the other person's being. Allowing the image of our friend, the sense of our friend to dissolve, to fade. Resting awareness in the heart center, grounded in the body. Now bringing to mind a neutral person, somebody we have either strong feelings of liking or disliking towards, but somebody we're fairly familiar with. Becoming aware of their being, their fundamental aliveness, their desire to be happy and free from suffering. And also, as we do this, aware of our own emotional responses. Trying to balance those aspects of our awareness. If we become aware of the fact that this person suffers and experiences joy, coming into relationship to that, and also our emotional responses to that. Without judging or being self-critical, just expanding our sense of kindly awareness to include these aspects of another person's experience, as well as our responses, possibly our responses to our responses. If we become disinterested or distracted, just recognizing that that too is a resistance or a blockage. No need to criticize or judge, just coming into relationship to that disinterest. Seeing if that brings us into closer relationship and awareness of the being of this neutral person. Allowing the neutral person, our image of them, our felt sense of them to fade away. Resting in the heart center. In touch with our own aliveness. Bringing to mind someone we have difficulty with, who we find difficult, who we might treat like an enemy. Coming into awareness of their being, of their desire for happiness and freedom from suffering. Looking to balance that with an awareness of our own emotional responses. Coming into relationship with whatever emotional responses we might have, neither indulging nor denying, not judging ourselves or criticizing ourselves. Just noticing and opening to the possibility that with noticing there can be a deepening of more of a heart connection with this person. And as we come into an awareness of this person and their being, we might become aware that they suffer, or that they experience happiness and display qualities. So allowing our awareness to go there if they emerge. And again, balancing that with an awareness of our emotional responses without judging or criticizing. We're always expanding our field of kindly awareness to include everything that's arising in our experience. Allowing our image or felt sense of the person we treat like an enemy, the person we find difficult, to dissolve. resting in the heart center. In touch with ourselves, we'll bring back to mind the friend, the neutral person, the person we find difficult, becoming aware of the being of all four people. So our responses won't be the same to everybody. We have a different atmosphere to the relationship with ourselves and with different people. But we can become aware that we're all equally alive, all equally desiring happiness and freedom from suffering. Aware of any imbalance in our emotional responses to these different people. Can we connect fully with the desire in each person for happiness and to be free of suffering? So meeting all four people with kindly awareness, dwelling together in a field of kindly awareness. And it's in the nature of this kindly awareness to expand, so becoming aware of each other, participating in this meditation across the world. So aware of this connection with other human beings. All of us desiring happiness and freedom from suffering. And yet sometimes suffering, sometimes experiencing joy. Aware of any resistances or knots. Seeing if this allows us to deepen our awareness of each other, our connection with each other, our shared aspiration and desire. And expanding to include others, people we know, people we don't know. And relaxing now completely, giving ourselves the space just to sit. Again, nothing to do, just this. And finally, rousing the desire, the aspiration that we can share any benefits from the meditation with other people. Dedicating the merits to all people, all beings. And in your own time, bringing the meditation to a close, opening the eyes, and when you're ready, beginning to move. Okay, so I'm aware some of you need to go off to work and breakfast, things like that. We've been meditating a little bit longer there than on previous mornings, so it's just coming up to 8:20 here in the UK. But there is a little bit of time, we've got 10 minutes, so I'm open to questions or comments Nick has just invited you in the chat box to post anything you might have. Jack and Jeremy might have questions again.
So Sangharakshita is saying, I'm sitting with a lot of hatred towards the causes of suffering, i.e. the Russian army and its overriding any compassion I try to evoke towards the individual Russian soldiers. My practice seems to be so powerless to deal with this. What would you or the Buddha say to help?
I don't know what the Buddha would say. I can try and guess. I mean, it sounds like it could be. So I'm just going to get the question up so I can get the wording right. Like you say, a lot of hatred, sagradana, the causes of suffering. Yeah, I mean, it could be one of those occasions where actually it's something to step back from. Like you say, if there's a lot of hatred, it could be one of those occasions where we're running into overwhelm, and it might be good to try to simplify and just stay with one's more immediate experience of the people around us and the specific people we're bringing to mind in the practice. But I appreciate that one can say that, but when one sits to do the practice, because it's in our consciousness and we're aware to the degree we can be aware of what's happening in different parts of the world, it just kind of comes in, doesn't it? So I can appreciate that. I think basically it's like I've been saying, that we're always trying to be as aware as we can be of our own emotional responses. And, if you're experiencing a lot of hatred, that's what we expand our kindly awareness to. If, like you say, there's an overriding compassion. Sorry, you're saying that, hatred overrides compassion, yeah. Again, just bring that into awareness. I know it sounds like incredibly simple, and when we try to do it, it's not simple and it's very difficult, but I'm still confident that is always the best approach. So just try, and if it doesn't work, if it's too overwhelming, it's just information, I think, that actually need to step back a bit from that, and just try a different approach. Bring specific people to mind, friends to mind, people that we know to mind. So just step back a bit from the big kind of geopolitical events that we're aware of, that are out there and are, very understandably distressing. So I think the approach works. It's just, it will either be very difficult or more straightforward to actually apply. So I wouldn't say you are powerless, actually. You might feel it, but bring awareness to that feeling of powerlessness, and see what happens with that. See if that just helps to, like I've been saying, I've been using the language of loosening knots or softening resistances. Sometimes that's all we can do. And sometimes it's like, I don't know, trying to think of an image in my mind, but it's like we've got a really big knot. And you get that messy knot of string and you have to work on one little knot to undo all the others. It might be that that's all we can do, so we might move a millimetre of string, but we're still undoing the whole knot. So just keep trying, but work in an appropriate kind of way.
So there's one from Becca. Where can we find out more about the Dharma on different emotions? And then she says, thank you very much for a wonderful meditation.
Well, thank you. Good question. So I mentioned the Abhidharma tradition, didn't I, in the introduction there, and the kind of classification of different mental states. So Sangharakshita, there's a book of his, Know Your Mind, which is a good starting place. It's based on a seminar that he gave on a particular Tibetan Buddhist text, and he goes into the different mental states there and gives practical advice about how to explore and work with them. But there's also Mind in Harmony by Subhuti, which is based on Know Your Mind, and to some extent might be a bit more accessible. He's written it deliberately as a book rather than it being based on a seminar. And in that, he talks about the kind of pairs of opposites. So when you get a negative mental state, what is the positive mental state in contrast to that? Again, it's very, very accessible, very readable. Good place to start in terms of exploring the Abhidharma, which can be very kind of complex and elaborate. So yeah, Know Your Mind, Mind in Harmony. Nick's very good with links. He's posted some links to those books if you want to follow them up.
Yep, so there's a question from Serene. How does one cultivate metta for their oppressors, and is there a need to do so?
I think what we're trying to do with the Metabather is, as I said yesterday, quoting from the Karaniya Metta Sutta, bring forth a boundless loving kindness for the whole world. So there's certainly no limit that we should place upon the potential for loving kindness in all directions. If we're bringing to mind somebody we know who's acted unskillfully in some particular way, whether that's oppressing somebody or whether it's, I don't know, not holding the door open for somebody, whatever action it might be, we are trying to bring loving kindness to them, and as I've said, their desire for happiness and suffering. And I'm completely confident that at root, and the Buddhist tradition tells us this, and I kind of see it from my own exploration of my own human experience. I'm completely confident that at root, everybody wants to be happy and avoid suffering. It's just that we've got all these crazy strategies to try and bring that into being. And that includes things like going to war with people. It includes all kinds of horrific acts throughout human history. But at root, it's that basic human desire. So we can obviously cultivate love and compassion for those who make a real hash of that or a real mess of that. Difficult to do, isn't it? Because what we probably encounter is a lot of resistance. So again, that resistance, those blockages, those knots, in relation to our friends and people around us and people we know kind of personally, that's one thing. But when we come up against, really hugely unskillful acts, even what we might describe as evil, it obviously gets increasingly more and more difficult. But again, just like I said in response to Sagradana's question, we just have to start where we can with the smallest of knots and trust that it's having an effect. This might be controversial, but I'm going to say it, and there's 4 minutes left, so I'll kind of say it and leave it with you. But in a sense, the whole of the Metabather practice is about me. In a sense, you could say that. Obviously, on the other hand, it's completely about other people and expanding metta to them. But in a sense, it's always about me and what I'm like, coming into awareness of myself, coming into awareness of how I relate to other people. And the more I do that, the more I can establish that awareness of my own being and bring awareness to the being of other people. I'm completely confident that that's transforming the world. Might not feel like it. Just in the first 2 days, we didn't even bring to mind other people. But in doing that, we transformed the world. I'm completely confident in that. That if we bring awareness to our own state, to our own mind, if, as we've been trying to do, we're coming more and more in relationship to our own fundamental humanness, our own fundamental desire to be happy and to be free from suffering, just coming into relationship to that is already having a transformative effect on the world. So even when we get these huge events that are in many ways completely out of our control on certain levels, they're not on the level of our own mind and the way in which that can have an effect on the world. It's kind of stepping into a different paradigm, isn't it, where we see effects across vast periods of time and space. But if we just bring awareness to our own being and expand that to the being of others, that is having a powerful effect on the world. I'm completely convinced by that. So there you go. I don't know how controversial that is. Maybe people just agree. Not much time to talk about it. Someone agrees. I got it in the chat box. And Jeremy's smiling at me rather than frowning, so that's a good sign. Okay, so I think we'll close there for this morning. Thanks to all of you for joining. Thanks to Jeremy and Jack for keeping me company in the second shrine room here at Padmaloka. As I said, do come in June, at the end of June, on that open day, and keep me company then. And thanks to Nick for his tech support. And tomorrow will be our final morning, so I hope you can join us tomorrow. We'll move on from the essential and intensive aspects of metta. We'll start to look at the profound aspects of the Metabather practice and give particular attention to the final stage and expanding metta to all beings. Okay. So thank you, and feel free to unmute yourself and say thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Bye.
much.
Everybody.
Thank you, Padmasagara. That was wonderful.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Welcome. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you very much, and looking forward to Padmaloka tomorrow.
Oh, great. Somebody's coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.